because that's really our role, is to facilitate helping the agency find that right person, helping the team find that right person, identifying like what are the gaps that maybe exist, and then how do we actually go out and find them. The first thing you have to do is sort of stop and really prep. For us lately, it's been, have they been where we're going, right? So have they seen the story? Have they been through that? So it's not just even like on paper, what are the skills? It's some of these other pieces that become really, really important. The idea of what's right for each company is so different, is the best, CMO or whatever role it is out there. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're right for your company.
Hi, Katie. How's it going?
Good, Chris. Thanks so much for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. So I wanted to jump straight in, really. I know that you've got tons of really exciting experience from companies like Spotify, Grayscalable, and now SevenRooms. And I know that something you're passionate about and that you've had a lot of experience doing is bringing executive talent and hiring in-house. And from speaking to my network and lots of different people, that they go through this challenge of deciding how they're going to bring in top-tier executives. And there's, as you know, lots of different ways to do that. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity to discuss with you, I guess, the problems that you faced before and how you solved that challenge. So first off, I guess exec search and hiring, are you a fan of bringing it in-house or using partners?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I don't actually know if there's one specific answer, because I think certain roles require different things and every company is a little bit different too. So, and I've been personally on both sides of that. I think it is the benefit of obviously having in-house is that your leaders so much better, your business so much better, the culture, the people, the things that are really going to help really make things tick. So I think from that standpoint, the benefit obviously on the external search firm side of things, really is that you have folks that just do this day in and day out, and they have deep relationships. They have all these other pieces that they can really bring to the table. So that's really valuable too. And I think for every company, it's not one answer. Even for us, we do here at SevenRooms, we do a mix of both. So we've had some searches where we've worked with search firms. We've had some that we've handled in-house. So I think you just have to take a kind of a look and see what makes sense at the right moment, I guess, if you will. And I think the other considering factor is what's the expertise on the team. So for example, right now, we're hiring a VP of engineering. That's not my personal expertise as a recruiter. I spend more of my time on the business recruiting side of things and the technical. And so being able to lean on a search firm that does have that, engineering and technical expertise has been really valuable for our team.
So when you get a exec role or a very senior position, you have kind of like a checklist of things you say, whether you keep this in-house or whether you go out.
Yeah. I would keep the checklist. And I think the first thing that we do, and actually we started doing this here at SevenRooms, is that before we really kick off, whether it's by myself or whether it's with a search firm, we actually go through our own internal network. So I'll sit down with our executive team or our leadership team and say, hey, we're looking for this role. And I'll go through their LinkedIn network, one by one. I'll sit down with our CEO, I'll sit down with our CRO, I'll sit down with each, and we do quick searches. And it sounds basic, but we literally will do quick searches through and see who they know and who they actually have a good connection with. We'll have them send out messages. We've actually made a couple of hires from that, which has been really, really helpful. So we'll start there, and then we'll figure out, okay, what do we need to do differently if that's not going to get us the right person?
That's really cool. Like a paired sourcing kind of searching activity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I literally have them share their screen, and we go through and we talk about, okay, do you feel comfortable enough with that relationship with that person? And if you can't reach out to them, I'll go ahead and reach out to them. We'll find another way in.
Mm-hmm. And so when you look at your regular kind of BAU hiring or tech hiring, business hiring, what for you are the biggest differences and changes you need to make when you're elevating that to a more executive search? Why are they separated, and why are they seen as two very different things in your opinion?
And I think that the stakeholder internally is obviously quite different than, if you're talking about a manager level or even a director level for that matter. The people that are on the interview panel, the perspectives, the impact of the role is obviously quite different. And so there is a slight difference, but I think if you're this actually lines up with my philosophy on like hiring like regular day-to-day people. I actually feel like it should mimic a lot of what we do in executive search. And so what that means is like really high touch, like white glove type of engagement with those candidates. And obviously that's the gold standard. And to some people, sometimes, things happen, of course, but I think that's the standard for what you try to do every time with every candidate. And then with executive search, I think with that being different, it's really tailored because you're talking with folks who the impact that they and the value that they add in terms of revenue, or it could be, you have a role that you've never had before. And that's, I think, where SevenRooms is at. We're going through that evolution now where we're hiring positions that never existed for the company before. So we're talking through things with our chief people officer, chief product officer, a CEO, CTO, like our founders, our exec leadership team. And so it's really identifying like what are the gaps that maybe exist, and then how do we actually go out and find that. Like I think sometimes with the IC or the mid-level positions, it's we might have this thing that needs to get done. Where on the executive side, it's how are we up leveling the business to the next point, and how does this role or this role and then in turn this person help us get there.
That's a really good point, that a lot of the time when you're recruiting for especially startups and scale-ups, these exec roles are going to be the first one in to the business. Yeah. And maybe the founder has never even hired this role before or worked with someone like this before. Yeah. Even. When you're creating that profile and you're building that with the founder or the CEO or whoever else, what's the process? What are the important things there, and how involved the talent get? Because I've seen it happen in numerous ways where you just kind of get this job spec and it's like, go and find this person, but that's not ideal. So how do you prefer, and how involved do you think, and when should TA get involved?
Yeah, great question. That's spoken like someone who's spent a long time recruiting this.
Yeah.
No, and I think it is true. It's like you just have a job description, right? You could just try to go off that. And I think what I've learned throughout my career is the first thing you have to do is sort of stop and really prep. And I think that has been really, really helpful for me. And I think what that is, obviously CEOs are busy, leaders are busy, but you have to slow them down just a little in the beginning to make sure you get the right information. So it's not just what's on paper with the job description. It's really understanding, again, like I said before, kind of what the gap is or what the business need is. What are we going for? How is this role, kind of getting that sales pitch almost of like, how is this role really going to transform the business or function or whatever the case might be for that role. But the bigger side of it too is really understanding a couple layers deeper on what, whoever's hiring for, let's say it's your CEO, really understanding what they're looking for, right? Because they could say, hey, I'm looking for, and I've worked with this in the past where they've said, I want the best, X person. And it's like, I don't know how to find that for you. You have to sort of like break it down into a couple of different layers of what's the right company maybe that they've come from, or what's the right type of background or trajectory that they've had throughout their career. For us lately, it's been, have they been where we're going, right? So have they seen the story? Have they been through that? So it's not just even like on paper, what are the skills? It's some of these other pieces that become really, really important as you're evaluating. If you don't start with that, you're going to get far in your search and have to kind of go back, and you might get folks to the end of the line that just can't get through the end of the process because they don't match up to the expectations.
Talentful provides flexible recruiting solutions to the world's most ambitious companies. Are you thinking about ways to add flexibility to your talent function? With recent market volatility and hiring set to return to growth mode in the near future, there's never been a better time to choose the right partner to help you scale. Talentful's embedded sourcing, recruiting, coordination, and talent advisory services have been trusted by the world's leading brands. Companies such as Atlassian, Microsoft, Expedia, Pinterest, Waymo, and more. Whether you're hiring across engineering, go-to-market, or G&A, Talentful has got you covered. To find out how Talentful can help you, visit talentful.com.
And something that I've seen a lot is where CEOs get really caught up on maybe irrelevant details. So, what company logo they come from, or round of funding, or size, or they must have exited three times, or just something that's kind of seems quite abstract and not relevant to what they're actually looking for. How do you go through that process at the beginning of maybe pushing back on that kind of stuff? Is it about really understanding the role?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. The first thing that we've done, and I've started doing recently, I'd say in the last year or two, is we set and this actually really helps with that conversation. We create essentially a scorecard to say, like, and this is recruiters are doing this kind of stuff. They're setting, hey, what are the 5-6 competencies or traits that we're looking for in this particular hire? And what we started doing is sort of pushing the leaders to weight the areas that are of most importance. So let's say it's a 100-point scale and there's, 5 things on there, having them go through, and that might not be at even, 20 across the board or whatever that might be. You might be looking at, some things have a heavier weight than others, and different roles are going to be different. So, for certain roles, you might put data orientation or ability to make like informed decisions from data. That might be very top of the list and maybe is 20 points or 25 points. And then you sort of pair things out from there. But there might be something there that's a nice to have, and maybe it's only 5. So like not seeing it on paper, it's probably hard to visualize, but it's been really useful to guide those other parts of the conversation. So I can go back and, and I've done this at Brace Scalable too, where I can go back and talk to the hiring manager or the leader and say, we've mapped out these 5-6 areas, and you're kind of focusing in on something that maybe isn't even on here or is the lowest thing. So let's think about why that is. Let's talk through it. And sometimes it's just kind of putting it back on the page is sometimes just really helpful reflection, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just reminding like what's really important here, and not the vanity stuff that sometimes people get hooked on.
Yeah, you kind of like bring it back up over and over. Like I'll continue to revisit it, and like we have a debrief, I'll bring it up with everybody. We have like interview prep, I'll resurface it. And I think it's just kind of repetition of that. And then you start to get really focused on it. And it also helps when you get, we've gotten down the line with candidates before where they check, let's say 4 out of 5 of the boxes or 3 out of 5 of the boxes, let's say, but it's not the like 3 or 5 most important, or the culture fit, let's say, or the ability to like add culture or inspire or do these other things that might be lacking, and helping those leaders kind of figure out like, how does that impact if we avoid that?
Yeah. And so when you have that and you have what you think is a really good profile, I'm guessing at that point you'll have an idea who the hiring team is, like the interview panel and that kind of thing at that point. Do you bring them in on that journey early and brief them on like, this is the person we're looking for, this is what's important, and so they're really clear on what that is once they go into the interviews? Like, how do you manage that? Because again, that can be a really annoying roadblock in interview process where you've got people with differing opinions on what the role is, or they're marking or valuing different things that aren't important, which slows the process down. How do you manage that?
Yeah, so I think it is really important to bring that conversation to the forefront. And it's not just, let's say your hiring manager is the CEO. It's not just the CEO. It's getting everybody else there. And it's not even, in that conversation, I think what's important is not just saying, hey, you're going to cover this area and this other person's going to cover this. Like that part's important to show kind of what the full, well-rounded process looks like. But that's really the time for the hiring manager to say, hey, everybody, we're hiring in this role. We know we need this role. Here's, highlight maybe where the gaps are, the why behind the position. Like, why is it that we're actually hiring this role? And then I think that's really their opportunity to showcase what they're looking for and what we're looking for from a business standpoint. And also using that time to say, if people have differences of opinion, kind of using that time as the opportunity to actually kind of hash out some of those differences of opinion and like why. And it, for certain cases, like you might have that conversation and there might be 2 people who disagree on the subject, right? Or have different impressions. And it's about listening and taking those pieces out and helping be that person in between to kind of facilitate, like maybe there is something about what that one person said that does make sense, and maybe not the whole piece, but maybe there's something in there that you can satisfy all the different needs at the table.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And once you have that, then I guess the decision is, as we spoke about earlier, like where do you go? How do you fill this role? Like what's the avenue? Do you use like a Russell Reynolds or an Egon Zehnder or someone like that? Or do you bring it in-house? I guess if we go down the kind of, let's say you've decided to go to a partner instead at this point, how do you pick who you're going to use? Do you have like a bidding process where you get multiple people involved and you get them to present? Is it based off network? Like, talk me through your process for any leader that's out there, looking to bring on a firm to help them with important searches.
Yeah, no, I think what's really important is to I wouldn't say reach out to every possible search firm. I think my recommendation is ask around with your peers and say, hey, I'm looking to do X search. Does anyone have any recommendations for search firms that they've worked with or have heard good things about? And I think starting there is a good place, or seeing if any of the executives at your company have worked and had really good experiences with search firms in the past, and start with those companies. And maybe that's 3 or 4, let's say, that you're starting to look at. And then from there, having those conversations, and you can use a variety, obviously, like having and listening to their approach and finding out kind of what type of, if their approach sort of lines up with what you need. But I think starting with a recommendation is always a really good way to go, because you can sort of get the inside scoop maybe on like why they're really great, or maybe why they're great, but maybe there's this one thing you need to help them out with, or and the one thing too is that I think not every search firm, you might not always get the same person. So finding out if there was a specific, especially at the larger firms, for example, if there was a specific recruiter that someone had an experience with, finding out if that actually is the person that you can work with if you have a really good with that, for example.
That's interesting. Yeah. So making sure that, because the recommendation will really be about that person's work that they worked with, not necessarily the firm. So that's a really good call out, actually. And when you do, speak to these firms and they do present back to you, are there particular things that you found work really well and things you look out for when you're trying to bring on a search firm?
Yeah. I think that, and it sounds basic, but it's like the listening aspect, because I think we talked about this previously, but the idea of what's right for each company is so different. And so are they listening? And even in that first conversation, or are they just saying, oh, it's easy to get caught up in saying like, this is like a great brand or logo or something like that, and this person is the best, CMO or whatever role it is out there. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're right for your company. For example, it's really understanding if the recruiter has listened in terms of what makes the best or right hire for your company, and like who are some of those first people that come to their minds in that initial conversation. Or sometimes they'll send you like a follow-up and say, hey, here's like 5 or 6 profiles that we're thinking about. How on the mark are those folks? How realistic are those folks also? Sometimes they're on the mark, but they're not looking because they just landed, or other things like that. So really understanding kind of how they've approached that conversation, what kinds of questions they're asking in that intake meeting. So are they really trying to get to understand not only the role, but are they trying to get to understand the people who are deciding, right? Like, the stakeholders who are going to be making those hiring decisions, really taking the time to understand, okay, the CEO has this perspective, the CRO has this perspective, like how do all these things sort of play together into that final decision process?
Yeah. When you typically obviously choose one partner to work with in exec search, what's the payment structure that you typically find, or is there one that you prefer when working with a search firm?
Yeah, I find that lately I'm seeing most of them are about a third of total first year comp, and it's broken into essentially like 3, maybe 4 payment installments and things like that. But it's whatever that total first year compensation is, inclusive of bonuses or what have you. That's what I'm finding. That's from like the big firms all the way down through the more boutique ones that I'm seeing lately.
And do you notice a different kind of experience ranging from the more boutique firms to the larger mammoths out there? Is there like a bit more refinement that comes with the bigger players, or is it you get a bit more attention with the smaller ones? Like, what's the pros and cons?
I think, I think that there's definitely pros and cons to both. I think on the larger side of things, what you're also getting is their collective networks, right? And not to say that you don't get that at the boutique ones, but I think you have hundreds and maybe thousands of individuals, for example, or other people that are working at those larger firms, that there's a directory, or they have like some sort of CRM system where they're capturing all of those. They can kind of ask around with one another a little bit more. So their networks tend to be a little bit more extensive in that way, and they might be able to tap people a little bit quicker. It's just a matter of, are those the right people that you might want to tap? And then on the boutique side, I do think you get a lot more dedicated attention, I would say. They're typically, what I've seen, over the last couple of years when we've talked to them, is that they're working with far fewer clients. So they have a smaller team. They're deliberately wanting to stay small, I think, in a lot of ways, because it forces them to say, we can't take on too many clients at once. If you don't push to take on too many at once, you're not going to be sort of kind of pulled in too many different directions. I mean, I've even seen that on the consult, and I'm sure you all have at Talentful too. If you go in too many different directions, even non-exec search, your head spins, and so I like that side that we're seeing lately with the boutique firm.
Interesting. And when you start a search for a search firm, would you typically recommend that the leader in the talent function manages that search and manages that relationship, or do you hand that over to someone senior in the team?
Yeah, I think the talent leader should handle whoever is the core like hiring partner to whoever that leader is. Well, for us, it's me. That's the way our team is structured. I do our executive search. So whether that's me managing the search myself or me helping with the search firm, I think it just helps, rather than say, hey, if it's our CRO, for example, or someone else within the business, it just really helps kind of focus it. It's the scheduling. Like, there's a lot of logistical things that we can just help with. And it also allows the talent leader to kind of give sometimes the nudges that need to happen in a search. Or if there's that the direction goes off a little bit, you have a third party sort of in the middle that's helping both sides get to the right person. Because that's really our role, is to facilitate helping the agency find that right person, helping the team find that right person too.
Yeah. And I know that some people think that when they hire someone like this, they can just kind of sit back and relax, and then the company goes off and does all the work. But I know that it can be quite involved and require quite a lot of input from, and actually effort from the leader's side, to make sure that, like you said, feedback is getting to the search firm, it's going in the right direction, they're focused, the process is moving along properly. How much time should a leader dedicate to managing the search firm typically?
Yeah, the talent leader or the
talent leader, yeah.
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I don't know if I would put in hours on it. I think really where it is anytime, I think they should be involved. Anytime that there's like scheduling that's going on, I do think that's important to actually meet the candidates too. So even though, I think, and again, like you said, some talent leaders will say search firms handling it, like you guys just run with it. I actually think it's really important and useful to have myself meet that candidate at some point in time, because I can also help blend some color into the culture, history of the role, like some of the other pieces that I'm sure the agency is always doing a great job with. But talking with someone else that's not the hiring team, I think can be really useful from a candidate standpoint. They can ask other questions about the role or the trajectory of the team, and just sort of have another ally internally. And that's ultimately our role, is to kind of be that ally on both sides and find the right fit from a role, to help find the right compensation. And it helps me because I can also then get deeper into what are the candidates' motivations, how are they feeling. If we can have that direct relationship, it's useful. So I don't have a set time, but I do think it's important to put quite a bit of effort and time into that to help build the rapport between both the agency and the candidates themselves.
And do you typically take on the negotiation once you found a candidate that you want to offer, or do you leave that to the search firm typically?
Yeah, we'll handle that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and like I said, it helps me at the end of the line. If I have a relationship with that person, it really helps kind of when we're having those conversations, because negotiations can sometimes be, obviously, as you know, a little bit tricky, and making sure that everyone's feeling good on all sides. And, if we don't have all the information, if we don't have that relationship, or we don't know how heavily they're leaning in, then it can impact how that goes. So that's been really, really useful for us.
Yeah. And have you found that that's brought better results when you've been the people to, you've been the one to offer versus the search firm?
I think so. Yeah, and I actually think since I've been here in house at Seven Rooms, I don't think we've had the agency handle. I think I've handled all of them, and you're still talking to them. Like it's not like, hey, we just get to that point and the agency is now totally on the side. They're still checking in. They're giving us maybe insights that they didn't share. But yeah, I'll usually handle that, and it's been really effective.
Yeah, I can imagine. But like you said, it's really important to get that relationship earlier on if you're going to
Yeah.
do that for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Like that relationship part is so important. And as I said, like there's a lot of similarities, I think, for exec search and non-exec, because again, same thing. When you have even a mid-level or a junior candidate, if the recruiter can have a strong relationship with those candidates, it helps so much because they can call back on things that they mentioned earlier in the process of, hey, I know that you mentioned this was really, important to you or wanting to have an impact or these other pieces. You can kind of come back to it and talk through it, and it helps at the end of the day, regardless of, I think, level of role.
I feel like exec search used to be so different with the white glove service because that was seen as like most competitive part of the market. But now, as tech is so competitive in every single role, those techniques and those ways of closing executives is
Yeah.
needed in every role really now.
Yeah.
And I think that, you're definitely seeing a lot of the techniques and ways that they create really great engagement and candidate experience is coming through, like you said, into all kinds of hiring now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's like, I think that's one of for me as a recruiter, even before when I'm not doing exec search, I try to kind of operate in the same way. And I talk to the team, and that's sort of how we try to model our candidate experience is you don't want to hammer the candidates over the head with outreach and touch bases. You got to find that delicate balance, but, um, you know, really having those conversations and getting to know them not only helps in the end stages, but I think it also helps when they do join. They feel more connected to where they're coming.
I think you've approached this differently because of the size of SevenRooms, and I know that it would have been a lot different at Spotify. So, Bill, if you're thinking about internally building this exec search capability, do you build a function that is solely looking after exec search? I guess that you have to be at a certain scale to do that and have enough, roles coming through and hire people from search firms, or do you give your senior leads or senior recruiters the opportunity to take on exec roles, or do you do them? I know you said you lead the exec search where you are. What do you think a kind of a talent leader should do, and what are the different stages where they should start thinking about changing their approach to executive search?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I do think that it is all about the different stages. So, like at the size and stage where we're SevenRooms now, we're just over 300 employees. Does it make sense for us to have an executive search function at this size and stage? I'd say probably not. And I think it depends on the company, but even for most other companies, I'd say this size and stage and having like a really dedicated exec search team would probably be a little much, because I think some of the exec hiring at this size, it's not as constant. Sometimes it is. It can be a little bit more ebb and flow. So I'd say probably once you hit like the 500 or 600 employee mark, or then you can maybe say, hey, do I have one person who's just dedicated? If you're starting to see that constant wave or that need, or because sometimes it's need based, sometimes it's exploratory of like what are some of the things, like talking through with the leaders to say what are some of these areas, or it's like having those ongoing conversations. So having a dedicated resource at that point can be really, really useful. But yeah, and of course, as you get much larger, then you can have a more significant executive search function. But I think this size and stage or earlier is probably a little too soon to just have someone that's their sole responsibility. So, obviously for myself, I do that for our business, but I'm also like leading our day-to-day TA team as well.
Yeah, awesome. And then the final thing I wanted to touch upon is something that is, CEOs are notoriously big pains in the butt. And as I'm sure you found out, is that partnership when you're going through exec search. Like, what have you found, and how would you recommend talent leaders go about working with their CEOs on these searches and to build that relationship and that trust?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the some of the things that I found to be most effective on that front, and it sounds really basic, but it's transparency. It's showing results as well. And I think it's kind of putting things out there as simple as a Google spreadsheet that says, hey, here's the roles that we have that are hiring from an executive standpoint. Here's the people we have in play. Here's the people that have already come through and play. Like small things like that where you can show and they can visualize that in a really simple way. It sounds really basic, but it does go a long way because they can see that full picture. So I think that helps build results. I think or build that trust there. I think being able to be their voice as well in those early days of the search. So your CEO tells you that they really can't compromise on these 2 or 3 things. And whether that's you recruiting for that role yourself or you're working with a search firm, it's helping to be that voice. So I've had to have those difficult conversations with the search firms where we say, hey, these are the 2 or 3 areas that we're not willing to kind of sacrifice in this search. Like we've veered off course. We need to come back in. And so sometimes being able to show them that you're hearing them and you're kind of being their voice when they're not in the room or their advocate and what have you, I think really helps build a lot of trust as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. And do you, on the reporting side where you're showing the progress, like you said, is that done in kind of a weekly catch up, or do you send that across or share a document? What's the best method you found for that?
Yeah, so we'll do a weekly catch up, but usually what I'll do is when we're hiring a bunch of different exec roles, I'll just keep it, I'll send it, and I send that to the CEO, I'll send that to the executive team, just so everyone's sort of across and can see sort of what the updates are. And then in other touch bases, like be able to kind of have those connection points. If we have like board prep meetings and stuff, we'll make sure that we're highlighting that there. But it's never really a surprise, I think, for the leaders because you're sort of keeping that up to date. And if it's not the CEO who's, let's say, the hiring manager, making sure that they have the tools that they need to update, upward as well.
Yeah, awesome.
I think that helps a lot too.
Awesome. Well, I know we're hitting time, so I wanted to ask you one last question, and sorry for putting you on the spot with this, but the pace of recruiting is changing dramatically, and you've got all kinds of things like AI and automation, and I think the world of recruiting is probably going to shift quite dramatically over the next kind of 5 years. What are you most excited about the future of talent acquisition and recruiting?
Ooh, that's okay. What am I most excited? I mean, I think, I'm really curious to see how, some of these AI pieces kind of play into the actual recruitment itself. Because I don't think it necessarily replaces the recruiter and replaces the human touch. I think how does it sort of streamline and make, processes more, I know it sounds really basic and boring, but like, how do you make processes more effective? Because I do think that, when you can kind of like streamline those things, you can really make things simpler for candidates. I mean, as candidates, they want updates, they want all these different pieces. Hiring managers want the same thing. So how are we sort of providing that service? So anything I think that we're going to see that comes out that's going to help improve both sides of those things is going to be pretty exciting to see. And that could be in the form of like the way that you showcase your culture to candidates, for example, the way that you ask questions of that. Like it feels very out there at the moment, but I'm curious to sort of see how it's all going to play out.
100%. Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity for all the boring bits of admin that usually recruiters don't want to do and that causes bad candidate experience because they didn't get back to someone on time or they didn't prepare interview questions for the panel or something like that. If you could automate that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I talk to my team about that too. Like we're going through that right now. We're like, okay, how can I make it like simpler for you all to kind of like do the data? And it's not like they're not doing it. It just, there can be a lot of admin to recruiting. It's not all just talking with candidates because you have to do your write-ups and you have to make sure you stage people through and you're getting back and you're having all that. You want to make sure everyone's having a great experience both on the candidate and on the internal side of things too.
Yeah, the future's going to be super recruiters. That's the future. Okay, well, really awesome to chat to you, Katie. I'm a lot more knowledgeable now about exec search, and I'm sure the viewers will be too. So speak to you soon.
Yes, thank you so much, Chris. Take care.